The first pale light of dawn crept over the broken skyline of Rome, casting long shadows across the cracked stones and crumbling edifices of the once glorious city. From the parapets of the ancient walls, Marcus Valerius looked out over a Rome transformed by neglect and fear. The Tiber River, usually calm and steady, now carried the distant rumble of marching feet, a sound that stirred a mix of dread and resolve in his chest. Across the foggy expanse beyond the city gates, dark shapes moved steadily, barbarian warriors gathering under the stern command of Praetor Maximus, a grim reminder that Rome's enemies were no longer distant threats but imminent invaders. Beside Marcus stood Tiberius, his trusted military officer and lifelong friend. The veteran's weathered face was drawn tight with concern, his eyes scanning the horizon as if willing the approaching menace to halt. The cold morning air bit through their togas, but neither man stirred from their vigil. The city's fate seemed to hang on this fragile moment, balanced between the strength of ancient walls and the will of those prepared to defend them. "They come with the weight of the world behind them," Tiberius said quietly, breaking the silence. "Their numbers grow each day. Our legions are but shadows of what they once were." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant banners fluttering in the breeze. "Yet we must stand. For Rome, for our family, for the ideals we cannot let die." The two men descended into the war chamber nestled beneath the Senate House, where flickering torches cast tall, dancing shadows against the stone walls. Maps sprawled across heavy wooden tables depicted the city's defenses, crumbling gates, thinly stretched patrols, and the precarious positioning of loyal legions. The air was thick with the scent of burning oil and the quiet hum of whispered strategies. Tiberius traced a finger along the lines, marking the barbarian approach routes. "If we hold the northern gate, we might delay their advance, but the eastern wall is vulnerable. We lack men and supplies." Marcus leaned over the map, his voice low but resolute. "Then we must call upon every loyal senator, every citizen willing to bear arms. This is no longer a battle of swords alone, but of survival." Outside, the city stirred with uneasy anticipation. Word of Praetor Maximus's march had reached even the farthest corners, and the people whispered of war in hushed tones. Through an open window, Marcus caught sight of Livia standing apart from the gathering crowds. Her face composed yet etched with worry. Her sharp eyes met his briefly, a silent communication passing between them, a shared understanding of the sacrifices to come. Meanwhile, Praetor Maximus moved among his troops with the precision of a seasoned commander. His grizzled features betrayed no emotion beyond a cold determination. The clang of armor and the sharp commands he issued echoed across the camp, a stark contrast to the fragile calm within Rome's walls. His gaze swept over the city's silhouette, a silent vow burning in his eyes. This conquest would be swift and absolute. Back within the city, Marcus and Tiberius faced the daunting task of rallying a fractured populace and a depleted military. The political fractures within the Senate mirrored the physical cracks in the city's defenses, and Marcus knew that the looming siege would test more than just their strength with swords. "We face enemies without and within," Marcus murmured, folding the map with deliberate care. "The Senate's divisions weaken us. We must unify or perish." Tiberius placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Then we fight not just for Rome, but for what it once stood for, and for those who still believe." As the sun climbed higher, casting a harsh light on the decaying grandeur of Rome, the gathering storm of war approached inexorably. The choices made in the coming days would shape the legacy of the Valerius family and the fate of an empire teetering on the edge of oblivion. Marcus's thoughts drifted to his son Gaius, and the dangerous paths he now walked. The family's survival might depend on uneasy alliances and hard compromises, but for now, the immediate threat was clear and pressing. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the tide of fear and uncertainty. "Let them come," he said softly. "Rome will endure in whatever form it must." The clang of a distant bell signaled the city's call to arms. The gathering storm was no longer a distant threat. It was upon them, and amid the shadows of crumbling pillars and fading glory, the defenders of Rome prepared for the battle that would decide their future. The walls that had stood for centuries now bore witness to the fragile hope and grim determination of a people caught between the past and an uncertain dawn. In the heart of the city, Marcus Valerius gazed out once more, knowing the fight for Rome's soul was only just beginning. Night fell, but the fires of resistance burned bright. The coming days promised blood and sacrifice, and as the first stars pierced the darkened sky, Marcus resolved to face the gathering storm with every ounce of strength he possessed. The fate of Rome and the Valerius family hung in the balance. The night wrapped Rome's outskirts in a shroud of uneasy silence, broken only by the distant howls of restless wolves and the crackling of a fire that sputtered against the damp air. Gaius Valerius crouched low by the flickering flames, his intense eyes reflecting the dancing light as he weighed each word with care. Beside him, Julia's gaze was sharp, alert to every sound, every shadow that might betray their presence. The barbarian chieftains sat opposite, rough-hewn figures silhouetted against the darkness, their faces marked by scars and hardened by years of battle. Their eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked between Gaius and Julia, wary of the Roman youth who dared to parley in their midst. "We seek not war," Gaius began, his voice steady but low, but survival. "The empire crumbles, and with it, the old ways. Help us forge a new path for our families, for our futures." The eldest chieftain, a towering figure with a mane of tangled grey hair, nodded slowly. "Words are wind, Roman. Show us your honor." Julia stepped forward, her confidence a stark contrast to the grim faces around her. "We offer more than words. Alliance, mutual protection, trade." A flicker of something like interest sparked in the chieftain's eyes, but the tension in the air remained palpable. These were men who had known betrayal and bloodshed. Trust was a luxury in short supply. Meanwhile, back within Rome's tangled web of stone and shadow, the city itself seemed to pulse with a growing unease. In narrow alleys and dimly lit taverns, spies and informants moved like ghosts, exchanging secret messages with hurried urgency. The air was thick with suspicion, every whispered rumor a potential dagger aimed at the Valerius family. Word of Gaius's covert meetings had begun to seep through the cracks, and with it, the threat that their fragile plans might unravel. In one such shadowed chamber, Julia confronted Gaius, her eyes flashing with a mix of concern and determination. "You cannot afford mistakes, Gaius. Every secret meeting, every whispered word, there are ears everywhere." Gaius met her gaze, his restless energy tempered by the weight of responsibility. "I know the risks, but if we cling only to the past, our family will be lost. We must adapt, even if it means crossing lines once sacred." Their conversation was cut short by the sudden arrival of a messenger, breathless and wide-eyed, bearing news of increased patrols and tighter surveillance. The walls seemed to close in, the city's decay mirrored in the crumbling trust around them. As dawn broke, Gaius climbed a rocky hill overlooking the barbarian encampment. The first light painted the tents and fires in hues of gold and shadow. He allowed himself a moment of hope, a fragile, flickering ember amid the darkness encroaching on all sides. Yet beneath that hope lay the gnawing uncertainty of what these alliances might cost. Would they be the salvation his family desperately needed, or the spark that ignited their ruin? As Rome's twilight deepened, Gaius stood poised between loyalty and survival, the future hanging in a precarious balance. The night's whispers and the dawn's light together told a story of desperation and daring. In the shadows, secrets grew like wild vines, threatening to choke or to shelter. And in the heart of it all, the Valerius family's fate teetered on the knife edge of change. The city awoke slowly, unaware that the fragile threads holding its future were being woven in darkness threads, spun by a son who dared to dream beyond the empire's fading glory. The question lingered, heavy and unresolved. Could such secrets in the shadows bring about rebirth, or only deepen the decay? The answers, like the city itself, remained shrouded in mystery and danger, waiting for the dawn to reveal their true shape. The heavy wooden doors of the Valerius ancestral home creaked softly as Marcus led the way into the dimly lit atrium. The flickering glow of oil lamps cast long shadows across the marble floors, their light dancing uneasily on the worn tapestries that hung from the high walls. The house, once vibrant with the laughter and footsteps of generations, now felt subdued, as if it too mourned the fading grandeur of Rome itself. Lucilla stood near the hearth, her delicate frame wrapped in a simple but elegant stola, the pale fabric catching what little light there was. Her gentle features were drawn with a quiet tension, eyes reflecting the weight of unspoken fears. As Marcus and the others settled around the heavy wooden table, the air thickened with anticipation, a fragile silence that begged to be broken. Brother Lucilla began, her voice soft but resolute. I must speak plainly. The decay we witness without is but a mirror to the rot within our hearts. I fear we have lost our way, forsaken the virtues that once made Rome great. Mercy, honor, faith, these are not mere relics of the past, but the pillars upon which our future must stand. Her words hung in the air, fragile as a whispered prayer, but they struck a chord deep within the gathering. Marcus's sharp eyes met hers across the table, a flicker of sadness passing through their depths. He nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her message, yet bound by the heavy chains of political reality. Livia's dark eyes narrowed, a shadow of impatience crossing her composed face. Mercy, she said quietly, is a luxury we can ill afford. The world has changed, Lucilla. Our enemies grow bolder, and our allies fewer. Pragmatism must guide us now, lest we be crushed beneath the weight of our own idealism. The room seemed to grow colder with her words, the flicker of flame from the hearth casting sharp angles across her austere beauty. Lucilla's gaze faltered for a moment, hurt and defiance warring within her. Gaius, unable to contain the storm within, rose abruptly, his youthful energy crackling like a live wire. Pragmatism, he challenged, voice rising with restless urgency. Pragmatism is the surrender of our birthright. The empire crumbles because we cling to a failing past. We must embrace change, forge new alliances, even with those Rome once called barbarians, if we are to survive. His words echoed through the chamber, sharp and uncompromising. Marcus's jaw tightened, torn between the steadfast loyalty he owed to tradition and the undeniable truth in his son's fervor. Gaius, Marcus said measuredly, your passion is undeniable, but haste breeds ruin. We must tread carefully, lest we lose not only our honor but our very souls. Lucilla stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. And what of the soul of Rome? If we abandon our principles, What remains but ashes and shadows? Is survival worth the price of betrayal? No answer came. Silence fell like a shroud, heavier than the night itself. Outside, the city murmured with distant unrest, the clang of distant armor, the muted cries of the desperate, the restless stirrings of a dying world. Within the walls of the Valerius home, however, a more intimate battle raged, one of ideals, of hope, and of fractured loyalty. Marcus's gaze drifted to the window, where the last rays of daylight surrendered to the encroaching dusk. The ruined skyline of Rome, broken columns and toppled statues etched against the darkening sky, seemed to mock their deliberations. Yet within him stirred a reluctant hope that even amid decay, something enduring might yet be saved. "We stand at a crossroads," he said quietly, turning back to his family. "Each path bears its dangers, but whatever we choose, we must choose together. For if the Valerius family falls divided, the empire's fall will be all but assured." Lucilla's eyes glistened with unshed tears, yet she nodded, understanding the heavy burden they all bore. Livia's expression softened, if only slightly, and even Gaius paused, the restless fire within tempered by the weight of responsibility. The debate lingered late into the night, words weaving between hope and despair, loyalty and betrayal, tradition and change. Outside, the city's cries grew louder, a grim reminder that Rome's twilight was fast approaching. As the household finally dispersed, the chamber was left empty save for the flickering lamp, its flame wavering but unextinguished, a fragile symbol of resilience amid relentless decay. And in that fragile light, the silent dissent of a family torn between worlds echoed louder than any voice. A call to remember what had been lost, and a question of what must yet be sacrificed. The night deepened, but the struggle within the Valerius home was far from over. The empire outside may be crumbling, but the true battle lay in the hearts of those who would inherit its ashes. The Senate chamber was thick with the heat of torches and the murmurs of restless men. Cassius Drusus stood at its center, his imposing figure casting a long shadow that seemed to swallow the flickering light. The scar that slashed across his left cheek gave him a menacing aspect, but it was his cold, unwavering gaze that held the room in thrall. His voice, sharp and deliberate, cut through the disquiet like a blade. "Rome is no longer the empire of our ancestors," he declared, "but a crucible where the strong must forge new order from the ashes of the old." Around him, senators shifted uneasily. Some nodded in grim agreement. Others, those clinging to ancient ideals, exchanged wary glances. Yet none dared openly oppose Cassius now. His recent alliance with barbarian leaders had given him a power base beyond the Senate's walls of force that could no longer be ignored. His words carried the weight of inevitability, and the chamber grew silent save for the crackling of torches. Marcus Valerius sat near the back, the familiar surroundings of the Senate feeling suddenly alien. He was a man of tradition, steeped in the rhetoric and customs of a Rome he believed worth preserving. But tonight, his eloquence seemed a fragile shield against the tide of change that Cassius represented. His hands rested on the marble table, fingers tapping a quiet rhythm as he weighed the shifting currents. Outside, the city groaned under the weight of decay. The distant clang of metal and the low roar of unrest seeped through the thick stone walls, reminders of a world unraveling. Marcus's gaze drifted to the small window behind him, where twilight bled into the darkening sky. The empire was slipping through his fingers like sand, and his heart ached with the recognition of his diminishing role. Later, in the quiet of their ancestral home, Livia Valeria watched her husband from across the room. The flicker of torchlight danced across her composed face, her sharp eyes reflecting both resolve and concern. She had long urged Marcus to embrace pragmatism, to temper idealism with the harsh realities of their time. Now, as Cassius's shadow stretched across Rome, her counsel grew more urgent. Gaius, their son, leaned against a column, his youthful energy barely contained. His restless gaze met Livius, an unspoken alliance forming between them. Father clings to a past that no longer exists, Gaius whispered, voice low but fervent. We must seize the future, whatever it demands. Livia nodded, her expression unreadable. The tides of power are shifting, she said softly. Survival may require sacrifices none of us are ready to make. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock. Marcus entered the atrium, his tall frame casting a long shadow. His eyes, though tired, held the steadfastness that had earned him respect for decades. We cannot afford division, he said quietly, yet we must not lose ourselves in the storm. The family stood together, a fragile unity amid gathering darkness. The following days in the Senate saw Cassius leveraging his newfound strength mercilessly. Senators loyal to him maneuvered with precision, sidelining those who opposed the emerging order. Flavius, a polished and calculating figure, confronted Marcus in the marble corridors, their exchange terse and charged. You cling to ghosts, Valerius, Flavius said, voice low but cutting. Cassius brings strength and vision. Your resistance is futile. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Strength without honor is ruin, he replied, though the conviction in his voice wavered beneath the weight of reality. As the political tide swept forward, Marcus found himself increasingly isolated. The Senate, once a bastion of measured discourse, became a battlefield where old loyalties dissolved and new alliances formed with alarming speed. The spectre of barbarian forces allied with Cassius loomed large, unsettling even the most hardened senators. At night, Marcus retreated to his study, a sanctuary where memories of a proud Rome mingled with the stark present. He traced the outlines of faded frescoes on the walls, their colors dulled by time, much like the empire he served. The distant sounds of unrest, a clash of arms, the cries of the desperate reached his ears, a grim chorus that underscored his solitude. He thought of Lucilla's gentle admonitions, of Livia's steely pragmatism, and Gaius's fiery impatience. The family was fracturing under the pressure, each member pulled by different currents of loyalty and survival. Marcus's heart ached with the knowledge that the path forward was no longer clear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Livia approached him quietly. We must bend or break, she said, her voice steady but heavy. Cassius's tide will not be stemmed by honor alone. Marcus looked into her eyes, searching for the resolve he once possessed. And what of our legacy? He whispered. What becomes of the Rome we vowed to uphold? Livia's gaze hardened. Legacy is not merely what we inherit, but what we do to survive. The words hung between them, a bitter truth neither wished to accept. As the chapter closed, the Senate's chamber stood empty and dark, torches extinguished. The echoes of Cassius's rise lingered in the stone walls, a portent of the irrevocable change sweeping through Rome. Marcus, caught between the tides of power and the bonds of loyalty, faced a choice that would define not only his fate but that of the empire itself. The question remained, could tradition survive the storm, or was it destined to be swept away with the ashes of empire? The answer lay in the shadows yet to come. The atrium of the Valerius household was cloaked in the muted glow of oil lamps, their flickering flames casting elongated shadows across the marble floor and the worn frescoes that lined the walls. Marcus Valerius stood tall and rigid, the weight of his senatorial robes heavy on his frame, his sharp eyes narrowed as they fixed upon his son, Gaius. The younger man's posture was taut with restless energy, his youthful face flushed with passion and frustration. Between them, the air was thick with unspoken history and a growing chasm of ideas that threatened to rend their family apart. "Father," Gaius began, his voice low but firm, "the world we knew is gone. Rome is no longer the unassailable power it once was. We must adapt or perish. Aligning with these new forces, these barbarians, is not betrayal. It is survival." Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. Survival by sacrificing our honor is no survival at all. The legacy of Rome, the traditions that have built this empire, cannot be discarded for expediency. They are who we are. Gaius's eyes flashed with impatience. And yet, those traditions have failed us. They have blinded us to the threats at our gates and the shifting tides within the Senate. If we cling to the past, we doom ourselves and our family to oblivion. Their voices rose, echoing off the marble columns, the tension palpable. Livia Valeria, standing near a tall window, her sharp dark eyes shadowed with concern, watched silently. She could see the stubborn pride in Marcus, the fiery ambition in Gaius, and the growing danger that their discord posed not only to their family, but to the fragile threads of power they still held. Enough. Livia's voice was calm, but carried an edge that commanded attention. Both men turned toward her, a momentary ceasefire in their verbal duel. "We are at a crossroads. The old ways have brought us to this precipice, but the new ways are fraught with peril. We must find a path that ensures the Valerius name endures." Marcus's gaze softened briefly as he looked at his wife. "And what would you have us do, Livia? Sacrifice everything we have stood for?" She stepped forward, the lamplight catching the glint in her eyes. "I would have us be practical. I have seen the Senate's shifting allegiances and the barbarians' growing reach. We must be willing to negotiate, to make difficult choices. Our survival depends on it." Gaius nodded, a faint smile breaking through his usual intensity. "At last, some reason. Father, you must see that your rigid adherence to tradition blinds you to the future." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And you, my son, risk everything on alliances that could bring ruin upon us all." The room seemed to contract with the weight of their conflict. Outside, the city whispered of decafant sounds of distant fires, the murmur of restless crowds, the steady drip of water from cracked fountains. It was a Rome unrecognizable, a city caught between glory and ruin. Later, the family gathered in the dining room, the absence of Lucilla palpable. Her voice, always a balm to their disputes, was missing, and the space felt colder, the shadows deeper. Plates clinked softly, but conversation was sparse, each member lost in their own turmoil. Marcus stared at the flickering candlelight, memories of a Rome that once was flooding his thoughts, while Gaius's restless glances betrayed his impatience to act, in a quiet chamber, away from the eyes and ears of their kin. Gaius met with Julia. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the stone walls as they whispered urgently about plans and alliances. Julia's merchant family connections provided valuable information and resources, and her support emboldened Gaius's resolve. Their hopes were tempered by the dangers that lurked spies, informants, and the ever-watchful eyes of Cassius, Drusus, and his faction. "This is our chance," Gaius said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we succeed, the Valerius name will rise again, not as relics of a dying empire, but as architects of a new order." Julia nodded, her eyes shining with conviction. "Then we must be bold. Back in the household, Livia's thoughts churned. She knew the family's survival depended on delicate balances and shifting loyalties. Her heart ached for Marcus, whose ideals seemed to anchor him to a sinking ship, yet she could not ignore the pragmatic path Gaius was forging. The fractures within the family mirrored those within Rome itself, an unyielding tradition clashing with ruthless change. As night deepened over the city, the Valerius family stood at a precipice. The choices they made now would echo through the ruins of Rome and into whatever future awaited beyond its ashes. The rift between father and son was no longer just ideological. It was personal, threatening to unravel the very fabric of their legacy. Marcus paced the length of his study, the weight of his ancestors pressing upon him. He wondered if honor alone could shield them from the storm gathering beyond the city's walls. Could he find the strength to bridge the divide, or would stubborn pride doom them all? The answers remained elusive as the first tendrils of dawn touched the horizon, promising another day fraught with peril and impossible choices. The Valerius family's fate tanned, perhaps that of Rome itself, hung in the balance, fragile and uncertain.